Have you ever noticed how silence rarely feels dangerous in the moment, yet somehow becomes the heaviest thing you carry later, long after the day has passed and the chance to speak has quietly disappeared? Most people believe regret comes from the wrong actions, the wrong words, or the wrong decisions. But few realize that the deepest regret often grows from what was never said, never questioned, and never allowed to exist out loud. This story is not about anger, conflict, or dramatic mistakes that are easy to see, but about the quiet habit of staying silent and how that habit slowly reshapes a life without ever asking for permission. There was once a man named Elias who lived in a town where nothing truly terrible ever happened, a place so calm and predictable that people mistook comfort for peace and routine for safety. Elias worked at the same building every weekday, walked the same streets each evening, and returned to the same small apartment where the light by the door flickered slightly whenever he turned it on. Every day followed a familiar rhythm that required very little thought. And Elias liked it that way because when life felt predictable, there were fewer reasons to speak up or explain himself. At work, Elias was known as dependable and agreeable, the kind of person managers trusted because he never challenged decisions and coworkers relied on because he never caused friction. In meetings, he listened carefully, nodded when others spoke, and wrote notes he rarely shared, believing that good work would eventually speak for itself without the risk of drawing attention. When ideas were overlooked or responsibilities increased without recognition, Elias felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the quiet signal that something was wrong, but he always swallowed the feeling before it reached his voice. He told himself that staying silent kept things simple, that patience showed maturity, and that speaking up would only complicate a system that already worked well enough. In his personal life, the pattern repeated itself with almost perfect consistency, as if silence had become the language he used to navigate every relationship he had. When conversations felt shallow or moments felt distant, Elias noticed, but he rarely asked questions, convinced that closeness should happen naturally without uncomfortable explanations. If plans changed or words felt careless, he smiled politely and let the moment pass, choosing comfort over clarity and telling himself that harmony mattered more than honesty. Over time, silence became Elias's habit, not because he lacked thoughts or feelings, but because he had learned that keeping them inside felt safer than risking misunderstanding. Each unspoken sentence became like a small object he placed quietly into an invisible pocket, unnoticed in the moment, but always present, always adding weight. Years passed without any single moment that could be called a failure. Yet something subtle began to shift, as if Elias's life was slowly narrowing rather than growing. He noticed that people spoke around him rather than with him, that decisions were made without his input, and that his presence was appreciated but rarely essential. Still, Elias said nothing. One evening, after another uneventful day, Elias stopped at a small market on his way home, a habit he kept more for routine than necessity, wandering through the narrow aisles without urgency. As he waited in line, an older man ahead of him struggled to lift a basket filled with smooth gray stones, their surfaces worn and polished as if they had been carried for many years. Without thinking, Elias stepped forward and helped the man steady the basket, surprised by its weight as it pressed into his hands. "These stones are heavier than they look," Elias said quietly, adjusting his grip. The old man smiled gently, his eyes calm and observant, as if he had heard those words many times before. "They always are," the man replied, his voice steady, "especially when you carry them longer than you need to." Elias nodded politely, assuming the comment was nothing more than a passing remark, and returned the basket once the man had settled it safely. Outside the market, their paths crossed again, and the old man walked beside Elias for a short distance, his steps slow but deliberate. "You carry weight like someone used to it," the man said without accusation, as if stating a simple observation. Elias laughed softly, unsure how to respond, and shrugged off the comment, telling himself it was just another harmless interaction that would soon be forgotten. But the image of the stones lingered. That night, as Elias sat alone in his apartment, the quiet felt heavier than usual, pressing against him in a way he could not easily ignore. He thought about the moments he had let pass without speaking, the questions he never asked, and the feelings he buried to avoid disrupting the calm he worked so hard to maintain. For the first time, Elias wondered whether silence had truly protected his life or whether it had simply delayed the cost. Days later, he saw the old man again, this time sitting on a bench near the edge of town, carefully arranging stones on the ground in neat rows. Curiosity overcame Elias's usual restraint, and he approached, asking gently what the man was doing. "Sorting what I no longer need to carry," the man replied, lifting a stone and setting it aside. Elias watched in silence as the man continued, noticing how each stone was examined briefly before being placed back on the earth. "Why bring them here if you're just leaving them?" Elias asked. The man smiled, placing another stone down. "So I can remember what it feels like to let go." They sat together for a moment, the air quiet but not uncomfortable, and Elias felt something shift inside him, a subtle recognition he could not yet explain. The old man finally looked at Elias and spoke again, this time with intention. "Most people believe silence keeps them safe," he said. "But silence, carried long enough, becomes weight." Elias felt the words settle heavily, not because they were harsh, but because they felt true in a way he could not dismiss. "What happens if you never set it down?" Elias asked. The old man's gaze drifted toward the horizon. "Eventually, you forget how it feels to walk without it." That night, Elias lay awake, replaying the conversation, and for the first time, he allowed himself to feel the weight he had been ignoring for years. He realized that silence had not just shaped his reactions, but his identity, teaching others who he was without ever giving him the chance to say otherwise. At work, he noticed how easily his ideas were bypassed, not out of malice, but because he had trained people to expect nothing from him. In relationships, he recognized how distance had grown quietly, not because he was unwanted, but because he was never fully known. Silence, Elias understood, had not protected his life, it had slowly narrowed it. The realization did not arrive with anger or blame, but with a quiet sadness that felt heavier than either, because it meant acknowledging his role in what he had lost. The next day, during a routine meeting, Elias felt the familiar tightening in his chest when a decision was made that directly affected his work. The room remained calm, voices polite, and the moment passed as it always had, offering Elias the comfort of silence. But something was different. He felt the weight of every unspoken word pressing against him, and for the first time, the cost felt heavier than the risk. Slowly, carefully, Elias spoke. His voice was steady, not loud or confrontational, but clear, and the room grew quiet as others turned to listen. Nothing dramatic happened. There was no argument, no sudden shift, only a simple acknowledgement that his perspective mattered. Yet when the meeting ended, Elias felt lighter than he had in years. It was a small moment, easily overlooked, but it marked the first time Elias chose to set down a stone he had been carrying far too long. In the days that followed, Elias practiced noticing the weight of silence, learning to recognize when staying quiet served peace and when it only served fear. He did not speak constantly or unnecessarily, but he no longer swallowed every thought to preserve comfort. Some moments were awkward, others uncomfortable, and a few led to conversations he would rather have avoided, but each time he spoke honestly, the weight lessened. He understood now that silence itself was not the enemy, but unconscious silence was. Choosing quiet could be powerful, but only when it was a choice, not a habit born of avoidance. Weeks later, Elias returned to the bench where he had met the old man. Finding it empty, the stones gone, as if the encounter had existed only to teach him what he needed to learn. He smiled softly, recognizing that some guides appear only long enough to point toward what we already know, but have been afraid to face. Ilias's life did not change overnight, and he did not become a different person, but his path widened, allowing space for his voice to exist without fear. Silence no longer ruled him, and when he chose quiet, it felt light rather than heavy. Now, before we end this story, here is the small practice I promised, something gentle and simple you can use in your own life. Tonight or anytime you feel the weight of silence pressing on your chest, pause for a moment and ask yourself one question. Am I staying quiet to protect peace or to avoid discomfort? If the answer is avoidance, imagine the unspoken thought as a small stone resting in your hand. Take one slow breath and decide consciously whether you want to carry it forward or place it gently back on the ground. You do not need to speak immediately, and you do not need to confront everything at once. But awareness is the first step toward walking lighter. Practice this once a day, especially in moments that feel small, because small moments are where the habit of silence grows. Over time, you may notice that your voice feels steadier, your boundaries clearer, and your life less crowded by unspoken weight. We cannot control every situation, and we cannot choose how others respond, but we can always choose whether silence is a refuge or a burden. Sometimes, the bravest thing is not speaking louder, but speaking at all. And when silence slowly turns into regret, the cost is often heavier than we ever imagined.